I like the word partner. I'm very pleased to be invited again to this conference. I want to commend Fermi Energia for their ability to foster collaboration between different entities in a very open and transparent fashion, and to really establish this spirit of shared goals, and very important ones. So last year, actually, at the virtual conference, so my name is Philippe Monette, I'm a consultant to Tractebel now, after I retired last year from my position as a Chief Technical Officer in the nuclear business line of Tractebel. And, but actually, I'm a part-time consultant to Fermi Energia under an agreement between Tractebel and Fermi Energia. So last year, at the virtual conference, I already reported on the site survey study which was initiated in 2020. So I'll give an update on this site survey study, as well as provide the results of some comparative analysis of cooling systems associated with what should be best for different sites. Okay. So two parts in this presentation. The first one is the update on the site survey. Site survey was initiated, as I said, in 2020. We did this together with Estonian company Steiger, present in the room here. And so since then, it was during COVID pandemic without traveling. So this year, at least we could do some site visits to complement what we had done before. And also, we developed a computer assessment tool, which I will explain, to be able to provide more fact-based and transparent assessment of different site options. Okay, that's what I will be doing now. So, not repeating what I said last year, but a quick recap is that we are actually performing such a study in order to identify suitable sites over the territory of Estonia. And we follow a process which is very well defined in the IEA Safety Guide SSG 35. So we make sure that all the safety aspects are fully covered, but not only that, all the environmental restrictions and so forth. So the site we are looking for, or the sites, candidate sites which we are looking for, must be able to accommodate an SMR plant of at least 600 megawatt electric or more. As mandated by IEA, there's a data management process which is very strict in terms of validating data sources, different data, and then uploading them into an ArcGIS, a GIS database, meaning that you're going to have data accumulating and improving over time in terms of development of a database which has, sorry, not this one, it doesn't work, okay, which has several layers of information that is organized by different disciplines. So there are many technical disciplines involved, all the environmental restrictions, cultural heritage, and so forth. I'm not going to go through the full list, but there are very diverse technical disciplines which need to be combined in a way in order to establish suitability of a particular site. It's really the first part of the process of site evaluation. So before site characterization and before the site selection, which requires involvement of the authorities, right? And therefore, passage of milestone 1. We have heard this morning about this objective to reach milestone 1 at the end of 2023 or beginning of 2024. But before that, there's a lot of work that can be done to apply the process and identify candidate sites, all right? So this is actually the subject that the person from the Ministry of Environment, Mr. Munt, I think, earlier on was talking about, and that's a process that is going to be officially repeated by Estonia formally to lead to the site selection, which is, of course, a very important step for the development of a project. the process being applied is a screening process of applying successively exclusion criteria in 2 steps, first at a very macro scale, and second at a more local scale, using screening criteria which are either exclusionary, meaning places where we cannot site a reactor, or discretionary, meaning that we choose not to go there for economic reasons or for inconvenience. Then the third step is new, is from last year. It is based on the development of this evaluation tool, Insight, we called it. And I will illustrate that, which is a more objective way to come to the identification of candidate sites, which is the end product of this study. So the first step was at the macro scale. We apply criteria such as minimum distance to borders, not in highly populated areas, not in Natura 2000 protected areas, with maximum distance to cooling water source, and not on a geological fault or away from geological fault. So applying all those criteria, we see that we identify six areas, and that will be then studied in further detail. But before we go there, we assessed that the areas on the west coast were not actually favorable from the point of view of infrastructure, meaning the grid is not developed, or transportation means are not developed, and there's no real demand for electricity in those regions. So we discarded those, and we end up with these 3 areas on the northern coast. We'll call them ABC, from west to east. And these are the ones that we then look at in more detail in step 2. Step 2 is still exclusionary, and so we'll apply then the more local exclusions. In orange here, you have populated areas, you have highways, railroads, you have a gas pipeline, you have a hazardous facility here for a fertilizer plant, you have some cultural heritage things. We even included in the database individual homes and a buffer around those. So we have the complete picture of those areas where we don't want to go, and the gray areas are the ones which are then going to be evaluated, okay, as potential sites. Flooding doesn't show up here, but in other places, we want to have a safety elevation margin against flooding. And then the second, or the major innovation here for the evaluation, is to produce some algorithms that model evaluation according to different criteria. The distance to cooling water is the one that is shown here. So if you are very close to the shore, you will be able to do direct cooling and you get the maximum score. Then after some distance, it's better to switch to closed loop. And the more you go away from the cooling water source, the lower the score you get, because of so the extent of piping and properties to be crossed and so forth. So there is the sea, but we also have a source of water at a former quarry that is then filled into a reservoir, which has been assessed to be sufficient for cooling of reactors, SMRs. So we already get to the results here. We'll have those 3 areas. This is area A, where you can see in the center there that there is room in the gray area that can be potential sites, but not the other ones which are colored by different reasons. This is the region B, which is the Kunda Bay. And there also you can see what is more or less the available land, and area C in the eastern part, which you already saw on the previous slide. So this is the output from step 2 exclusionary phase. And now I showed these evaluation criteria, by which the algorithm computes a score for each point on the map according to the criteria that has been defined. Then we need to combine in a weighted average or multi-criteria analysis all those scores. And this gives this composite view of those very different things, and with a higher score to the green as a green code and the lower score as a orange or red. So here in this area, you see that there is room for locating an SMR. There is enough space there. In the Kunda Bay, we see that the eastern part of the bay is best suited and has high scores. And in the third area, there are several possibilities actually, and we considered these different possibilities. So this tool was used to actually refine and confirm what we had already announced last time, of having those 5 candidate sites. Now it's all labeled preliminary because the Estonian government is going to initiate a formal official procedure to come to the final result of site selection, right? Okay, that's so much as I wanted to say about the updating of the site survey. In the cooling studies, the purpose was really to compare different cooling options which are associated with the sites. You know, a site away from the sea can only be closed-loop cooling. And so from this, also the extent of the piping lines that need to be installed to connect to the water intake, to the plant and the outfall. That all has some impact on the plant performances, and the main features of the cooling system will have an associated capex and opex. And so we all compare all those different cases through an NPV analysis. So we only have one site which has direct cooling, Kunda. Direct cooling is having a large flow of water that takes up the heat at the condenser and has the best efficiency, thermohydraulically speaking. And then closed-loop cooling with mechanical draft wet cooling towers. These are low-rise cooling towers in a battery, several of them. And that's the best suited solution when there's a limited quantity of water available, but it's also lower cost. Now, it still requires, of course, to have a source of cooling water, but the flow, the makeup flow is like 30 to 40 times less than a direct cooling. So it also has a lesser impact on the environment or on the water source. This is an example for the Kunda side. The layout is absolutely conceptual. The plant could be moved up a little bit. But so it shows that in direct cooling configuration, we do need to have very long lines, large piping, going out to the sea to reach sufficient depth for water intake, and then returning the water to the bay. So it's quite expensive from the capex point of view. So we did also apply the closed-loop system in this case, in which case we don't need this line going to the sea. We can remain with the bay as a cooling source and evacuation. This is a site inland, close to this reservoir I was mentioning, for which we would take in one branch water as a makeup flow and return it to another branch to ensure that there's no recirculation. So we ended up, of course, doing some thermodynamic modeling of the secondary circuit to calculate efficiency factors. And this is the comparison. Actually, for 2 cases, Kunda direct cooling and Kunda closed-loop cooling, where we see that the net power has a difference of 6 megawatt, which is about 2% of the power output. That's the penalty of applying a closed-loop cooling. So it's not a huge difference in plant efficiency, all right? 6 megawatt for 300 megawatt. And from an economic perspective, actually the direct cooling would be more expensive initially than the closed-loop cooling. We also compare here with other sites that have closed-loop cooling, and we compute here in this table the NPV difference between the different cases. And what we see when it's positive, that means that Kunda direct cooling is better than closed-loop cooling in Aidu, for instance, but it depends on the interest rates that is used for the WACC, the cost of money. So with high interest rates, actually it's the reverse. The closed-loop cooling is more economical, but all in all, there are relatively small differences in terms of money between these cases. Differential NPV is very low compared to the total investment. So economics is not a decisive factor for the cooling system selection. We'll have other things like environment, extent of disturbance to properties, and so forth. I think that's it. I'm ready to take questions.
Great. Thank you, Philippe. That was a good overview. Yeah, we have received several questions from the audience. First question, what do you think the government will do different compared to the analysis done by Tractebel? Include more risk analysis, waste management, question mark.
Okay, the waste management would be something totally new. This was for siting of SMRs, not siting for disposal site, as we heard this morning. But now, I forgot to mention that all the data that were used were publicly available from the Estonian website, which is called Maamet or something like this. And so, well, Steiger did all the data collection and preparing all those layers of GIS database. So that's the common and only set of data which is publicly available. So I'm fully confident that applying an IEA-like process will lead to the same conclusions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Then the question about your insight algorithm. Is it open source or a black box for the general public, the tool that you've been using for the nice graphs?
It can be explained. So currently it's a black box indeed. So it would require explaining what has been the scoring scale that has been used, and that is non-linear. Sometimes it has discontinuities. And also another parameter is the weighting factors between the criteria. So what could be done is explain all those criteria and the weighting factors, and allow members of the public or other stakeholders to assess those criteria, maybe modify them, modify the weighting scheme, and so forth. And that, of course, it would provide another colored map. So it's open for actually discussion and possibly sensitivity studies, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Another question. In terms of public acceptability, how do you conduct outreach to neighboring countries, Russia, Finland, Latvia? Maybe you know. Okay.
Well, the first thing was not to be in close to the borders. I think we defined a 15 kilometers distance to the borders to avoid having international environmental assessments and so forth. Although, okay, it's predicated on the promise by the vendors that the emergency planning zone is going to be very small. And then, we are confident that by keeping that distance, we are minimizing impacts on foreign countries. But it has to be part of the full environmental assessment, as well as site characterization studies, which come as next steps. Yes.
Mm. Yeah, and I think the outreach to neighboring countries, this is, if I'm not wrong, it's covered by ESPO convention. So,
yes.
so you need to do the
Yeah.
outreach. You need to send your information
Yes,
out anyway. So yes, it's absolutely public information and dialogue between the neighboring countries. Let me see. We have more questions and we have a few more minutes time. Well, this is there's a question. Are you planning public discussion with local inhabitants or on construction of SMR? Well, you can answer, but this is probably a question to Fermi, actually.
Yeah, well, it will be part of the process. What I didn't insist too much is that the site survey provides the basic data. Then the site selection has to be a very open and transparent step where the stakeholders are invited. There must be a method presented for grouping those criteria and assessing the different sites from different perspectives, including socio-economic impact in the region, public support or opposition, and then those things need to be presented in a workshop format and with some scoring sheets that will provide a traceable way of coming to a decision. But yes, stakeholder involvement and public acceptance is part of that.
Mm-hmm. As a comment from Fermi's point of view, we are already doing the public outreach. We are going, for example, we've been to Viru-Nigula or Lüganuse several times, and we are having already the dialogue, because we need to have the open dialogue, because without that we cannot build any nuclear power plant. So we need to be ready to answer all the questions that the local people have, and that's what we've been doing already several years, and we will definitely continue to do so. Okay, let me see. I had one question. Would it be in principle possible to build a SMR in our capital, Tallinn, or any other big town?
If it were a micro modular reactor, I would say yes. If it's a power station, I don't think that it's the best choice, but it could be located not so far. I think what I've shown there was it was still in Harju County, right? That's not very far from Tallinn. But so, yes, there has to be a change in paradigm of not wanting the plant to be located as far as possible from populated centers. Actually, there's no real need for that. And when you talk about the socio-economic impact, it's better to have people living not too far from there, and that the plant benefits the populated areas.
Yeah, we have some presentation coming later today about these topics. One more last question here. A lot of questions, cannot take them all. What are your thoughts on repurposing waste heat for district heating? So using the heat from the power plant in the district heating.
Well, it's absolutely used since a very long time for nuclear power plants located in eastern countries and northern countries, not so much where I come from or the southern western part, but indeed it's the case, I think, in Temelin, the Czech Republic, it's the case in Kozloduy in Bulgaria, it's the case in okay, I'm not going to enumerate them all, but the fatal energy loss or the residual heat can be used for district heating, yes.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Philippe.
You're welcome.